If suffering for one's faith is inevitable, how's one to bear it and carry on? That's the question the writer of 1 Peter answers today. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Thursday, April 28th, 2022. For the next couple of days, we're going to read some passages that will seem out of step with today's reality, leaving us to wonder how they apply to us today. For example, the writer of this letter encourages Christians to simply accept the authority of governments, even when those governments are actively hostile to the church. No respectable minister would encourage Christians to do that today, but it is a reminder that what sometimes we read in Scripture is time-bound rather than timeless. But it doesn't mean there isn't a word for us today. But let me back up just a brief moment and remind you what this letter is about. The writer, probably Peter, writing through a trusted assistant, is addressing the reality of suffering for the faith. He's actively encouraging the churches and their members in Asia Minor to maintain their faith in the face of suffering by placing their suffering in a theological context. Up to now, we've seen how he's written soaring prose designed to inspire them to have courage. Now he gets down to the heart of the matter and addresses several situations Christians are likely to face and advises them how to handle these situations. Let's listen to just a portion of this section from 1 Peter. For the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution, whether of the emperor as supreme, or of governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people. Yet do not use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but also those who are harsh. For it is a credit to you if, being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. If you endure when you are beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you should follow in his steps. So, clearly there are two situations here that face various members of the churches. Everyone lives under the authority of governments at various levels, whether the Roman Empire as a whole or the regional authorities under Caesar. We know that in the Roman Empire, the early church was seen as a nonconformist sect whose members generally refused to take part in the routine displays of patriotism, usually because these displays involved offering sacrifices to the Roman gods, which Christians could not do in good conscience. This put Christians at risk for persecution, which did happen from time to time. There was no thought of rebelling against the Roman Empire, though, for that would have been suicidal. But there was also no question of offering sacrifices to their gods. This would have been idolatry. The only solution remaining was to offer otherwise exemplary behavior, thus bearing witness to the righteousness of God. Did this strategy work? We don't know, but it seemed like the only available strategy open to Christian believers at the time. The second situation would have been faced by only some of the members of the church. The question of how slaves ought to behave toward their masters, especially those masters who were non-believers. Aware that Christian slaves would be subject to harsh punishment, Peter could have counseled them to run away, I suppose. But instead, he counseled them to remain in their servitude and endure suffering, even unjust suffering, as a form of witness to the suffering of Christ. Both of these situations should cause us to ask whether this advice applies to us today. Clearly, the answer is no. In the first place, we believe slavery is wrong, and wherever it exists, it should be resisted and abolished. And then imagine saying to a bunch of present-day American Christians, liberal or conservative, that they have to just accept government action without protest. So, what, if anything, does this advice have to do with us? Simply this. We may not in our own lives truly suffer for our faith, but the underlying advice to maintain our faithfulness in doing what is right under all circumstances rings as true today as it did then. Tomorrow, Peter reminds us that in our suffering, we should imitate Christ's example of faithfulness. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.